The author of the Acts of the Apostles is Luke, the evangelist. Why is he called an evangelist? Because Luke was not one of the 12 apostles. But how come that he wrote so much about Jesus, about Mary, for more detail? The truth was that Luke was a Gentile physician. And he believed that for you to be evangelized, you had to go through the emperors, the kings. So in the Gospel of St. Luke, Luke wrote that gospel through the Emperor Theophilus. He was actually evangelizing the Emperor Theophilus. Because of that adage, who use religious, who use regis. You know the meaning of that? That is, they believe that once you are able to evangelize the king, that is, the religion of the king is the religion of the people. Who use religious, who use regis. The religion of the king is the religion of the people. That is why even when the missionaries were coming to the Midwest part of Nigeria, they had to go through the Oba of Benin. And of course, you know that the son of the Oba had to go to, follow one of the missionaries. But that is a story for another day. Then today, the Acts of the Apostles actually is a continuation of the Gospel of St. Luke. And here is what we read this morning. In those days, an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Rise and go towards the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza." This is a desert road. And he rose and went, and behold, an Ethiopian eunuch. Did you get that? An Ethiopian eunuch. And who is this Ethiopian eunuch? A minister of Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians, in charge of all her treasures. So the point Luke is trying to bring out here is that they believe that once this minister is evangelized, then the whole of Ethiopia will become evangelized. Just as, the Emperor Theophilus. Remember, even this Acts of the Apostles is written to the people through the Emperor Theophilus. Just read the beginning of it. Now, Luke is bringing out, we have read how the disciples on the road to Emmaus encountered Jesus at the breaking of bread. That road to Emmaus is a description of the rite of the Mass, the liturgy of the world, where Jesus Christ himself was communicating, starting from Moses until they got to Emmaus and their eyes opened. But here there is an aspect today that Luke is bringing out, the aspect of catechesis. Remember, on the road to Emmaus, the terminus ad quo, you know the meaning, and terminus ad quem. I'm speaking this because I'm talking to Reverend Fathers Proxima. You know the meaning of that? That is very soon, Reverend Fathers Proxima. That's very soon you'll be Reverend Fathers, right? So now, so the terminus ad quo and terminus ad quem, that is the beginning and the end, right? So you see that at the end, the Eucharist was celebrated. So let us look at the terminus here. Now there was catechesis. He said, do you understand what you are reading? Did you get that? And he said, how can I, unless someone guides me? And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. So Philip here was a catechist. So he started explaining to him. And they got to the water, right? There's water here. I've gone through the rite of catechism, the rite of initiation, and all that. Why can't I be baptized? And what happened? Then Philip got, the Ethiopian eunuch baptized. Can you get the difference? The Emmaus journey ended at the Eucharist. Now, this journey of the Ethiopian eunuch ended with what? Baptism. And what is baptism? Baptism is a sacrament that cleanses us from original sins, make us Christians, members of the church, right? Children of God and members of the church. I'm bringing this out because when you see a lot of Catholics leaving the Catholic Church, journey under Pentecostal churches, is because somehow they don't understand the true Catholicism. I remember when for the 16 years I was a parish priest, I took it upon myself to make sure that once in a while I go and teach catechism. The catechists are doing a lot of work, right? But the catechists did not get your kind of training in the seminary. So they could go beyond cramming the catechism, but then as a priest you should be able to let the catechumen know that, look, this is the background, because every number in the catechism book has a root in the Bible. And this is very important. And what is the essence of all this teaching? The preaching and is witnessing. So Jesus Christ today in the gospel is emphasizing. Remember, look at the way John is doing this analysis. John is not part of the synoptics. And what are the synoptics? Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And which is the first gospel? Mark is the first gospel, not Matthew. And Mark was not an apostle. Remember? Mark was a disciple of Peter. Mark never encountered Jesus. Whatever Mark wrote down, remember, whatever Mark wrote down is what he heard from who? From Peter. That is, even the letters of St. Peter, they are authored by Mark. No, where they are written by Mark, because Mark was a secretary. So the point here today is that John is trying as much as possible to give a theological exegesis to the synoptics. I hope I'm understood. So John is interpreting what Mark, Matthew, Luke had already written. Why was John doing this? Or why did John do this? Because John was writing for the Hellenistic world, for the pagan nations. Mark got his source from Peter and the Q source, the Kel, right? The Q source. Now the Q source is what in Esako you call Unome, Nasua Hiram. That is the way the people were talking about what happened to Jesus. So now Matthew was writing for who? He was writing for the Jews. And that is why the genealogy ended with Abraham. Whereas Luke was writing for the Gentiles, and his genealogy ended with Adam. And now John now picked these synoptics to now explain to them this is what happened, because John was trying to convince the Hellenistic world, the Greco-Roman world, that this is what Jesus did. And so that is why he's using all these elements of light and darkness, and so on and so forth. So as witnesses, we need to have all these at the tip of our fingers, so that we can understand what we are telling the people. Because to be a witness, you must have the evidence. So this is my prayer today, that as you go out after your ordination, that there's what they call the Waimegbefu of the fowl in the Isako language. So this by the time the cock has grown, it will just crow and shake the water, like when they say, oh no, I'm now in charge. And know that from the beginning to the end, until you die, learning is unstoppable. You continue to learn, you continue to read, you continue to research, because it is gone are those days where priests were everything in the parish. You may be on this altar, you are talking, you don't even know that the layman there is a professor of theology. Like those days when we were in Siwa, when we are talking, you know that Sister Okure is in the church. You have to be very careful, because he was their lecturer, but he was not a priest preaching. So as you prepare for, what are you preparing for? As you are preparing for the diaconate, may God give you the grace. Remember, who was the first martyr? Who was Stephen? So the deacon was the first martyr, right? So, because I remember, are you ready to be a martyr in this condition? So, I was a deacon 37 years ago. That is when you were just breastfeeding, right? Or before you were. So may God bless and protect us both now and forevermore.